Man on the Street interviews with explainer segments. What do people think about Trump's tariffs? The sun was barely peeking over the skyline of Philadelphia, casting a golden hue on the cobblestone streets of Old City, when our news van pulled up near Independence Hall. It was April 2025, and the air was thick with the buzz of President Donald Trump's latest policy move, a sweeping set of tariffs targeting imports from China, Russia, Canada, Mexico, the European Union, and dozens of other countries. Dubbed Liberation Day by the Trump administration, these tariffs, announced on April 2, 2025, had sent shockwaves through global markets, sparked retaliatory trade measures, and ignited fierce debates across the United States. From Wall Street to Main Street, everyone seemed to have an opinion, but we wanted to know what everyday Americans thought. Armed with microphones, cameras, and a mission to capture raw, unfiltered perspectives, we hit the streets for Men on the Street interviews, weaving in explainer segments to unpack the complex world of tariffs and their impact. The scene, Philadelphia's Old City. It was a crisp spring morning, and the streets were alive with the usual mix of tourists snapping photos of historic landmarks and locals hurrying to work. We set up near a bustling coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans mingling with the chatter of passers-by. Our goal was simple: talk to as many people as possible, from all walks of life, and find out what they knew about Trump's tariffs, how they felt about them, and whether they thought these policies would make America great again or lead to economic chaos. Our first interviewee was Jamal, a 32-year-old barista wiping down tables outside the cafe. He had a friendly smile but a skeptical look in his eyes when we mentioned tariffs. Tariffs? Man, I've heard the word thrown around on the news, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't really get what they are, Jamal admitted, adjusting his apron. All I know is my boss is freaking out because the coffee beans we import are about to get more expensive. That's gonna hit our prices, and I'm worried customers will take it out on me. Jamal's confusion was a common thread we'd encounter throughout the day, but it was a perfect starting point. Before diving deeper, we needed to break down what tariffs are and why they're making headlines. Explainer segment: what are tariffs, and why is Trump using them? Tariffs are taxes imposed by a government on goods imported from other countries. They're designed to make foreign products more expensive, encouraging consumers and businesses to buy domestically produced goods instead. President Trump's 2025 tariff policies are a cornerstone of his economic agenda, aimed at reducing the U.S. trade deficit, bringing manufacturing jobs back to America, and addressing national security concerns like the flow of fentanyl from China and illegal immigration across the U.S.-Mexico border. On April 2, 2025, Trump declared a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, announcing a 10% baseline tariff on all imports, with higher rates for countries like China, up to 145% at one point, later reduced to 20%, Canada, and Mexico, 25%, and the European Union, 30% as of July. He also doubled steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% and introduced a 25% tariff on imported cars. These measures, described as reciprocal tariffs, are meant to counter what Trump calls unfair trade practices by other nations, such as China's non-market policies and high tariffs on U.S. exports. The administration argues that tariffs will protect American workers and industries, citing the $1.2 trillion U.S. goods trade deficit in 2024 as evidence of a broken system. However, critics, including economists and some business leaders, warn that tariffs raise prices for consumers, disrupt supply chains, and risk retaliatory trade wars. For example, China imposed 125% tariffs on some U.S. goods, while Canada targeted $155 billion of American exports with 25% tariffs. The economic fallout has been significant, with the S&P 500 dropping 4.88% on April 9, 2025, and consumer prices for goods like appliances and electronics starting to rise. Back to the streets, mixed reactions and real concerns. With the basics of tariffs laid out, we returned to Jamal, who nodded as we explained the policy. So, it's like a tax to make us buy American stuff. I get the idea, but if coffee gets pricier, people might just stop coming here. I need this job, you know. Jamal's concern about rising prices was a recurring theme. Just down the street, we met Sarah, a 45-year-old mother of two and a schoolteacher, who was pushing a stroller with her toddler. She had a more nuanced take. I voted for Trump because I like that he's shaking things up, she said, adjusting her sunglasses. I think we've been too dependent on China for everything. Clothes, toys, you name it. If tariffs mean more jobs here, I'm all for it. But I'm worried about my grocery bill. We're already stretching every dollar, and I heard toys might cost more this Christmas. Sarah's mention of Christmas hit a nerve. The toy industry, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing, has been particularly hard hit. Nearly 80% of toys and 90% of Christmas goods sold in the U.S. come from China, and companies like Mattel have already announced price hikes due to tariffs. We asked Sarah if she thought the tariffs would bring back manufacturing jobs, as Trump promised. She shrugged. Maybe in the long run, but I don't know anyone who's gotten a factory job because of this. My husband's a mechanic, and he's paying more for parts now. That's real money out of our pocket. Sarah's mixed feelings, support for the idea of tariffs but concern about immediate costs, reflected a broader sentiment. A Reuters Ipsos poll from March 2025 found that only 30% of Americans believe tariffs benefit workers, while 68% think they increase prices. Explainer segment, the economic impact of tariffs. Tariffs are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they can protect domestic industries by making foreign goods less competitive. Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum, for instance, aim to revive U.S. manufacturing, which has lost 3.7 million jobs since 2001, partly due to China's trade practices. The administration claims that by raising the cost of imports, companies will move production back to the U.S., creating jobs and reducing reliance on foreign supply chains. On the other hand, tariffs act like a tax on consumers. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs will cost the average U.S. household $1,296 in 2025, with some projections as high as $5,200 annually. When tariffs increase the cost of imported goods, companies often pass those costs to consumers, leading to higher prices for everything from electronics to clothing. For example, Mattel announced price increases on Barbie dolls, and Apple faces potential 25% tariffs on iPhones made abroad, which could raise prices by up to 43%. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries compound the issue. China's 125% tariffs on U.S. goods like chicken and wheat and Canada's 25% tariffs on $155 billion of American exports have hurt U.S. farmers and businesses. Global markets have also reacted, with the Nasdaq Composite falling 5.97% on April 9, 2025, the largest single-day point loss in its history. Economists like Jason Furman, a former Obama advisor, argue that tariffs are inflationary and could slow economic growth, with GDP shrinking last quarter as a possible early sign. Others, like Oren Cass of American Compass, counter that the price increases are manageable compared to Biden-era inflation and that tariffs address long-standing trade imbalances. The voices of small business. As the morning turned to afternoon, we moved to a nearby strip mall to talk to small business owners, who are often on the front lines of economic policy changes. At a family-owned electronics store, we met Priya, a 38-year-old entrepreneur whose shelves were stocked with TVs, laptops, and phone accessories. "These tariffs are killing me," Priya said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Most of my inventory comes from China or has Chinese parts. I can't absorb a 20% tariff, so I'm raising prices. Customers are already complaining, and I'm losing sales to online giants like Amazon who can stockpile goods and undercut me." Priya's predicament highlighted a lesser-known effect of tariffs: they don't just hit consumers but also small businesses that rely on imported goods. The closure of the de minimis rule, which previously allowed tariff-free shipments under $800, has particularly hurt e-commerce and small retailers, as platforms like Shein and Temu lose their cost advantage. Do I want more American manufacturing? Sure, Priya continued. But it's not like factories are popping up overnight. I can't just switch to American-made laptops. They don't exist, or they're way too expensive. Priya's concerns echoed those of economists who argue that tariffs won't quickly reverse decades of offshoring. Building new factories takes years, and the U.S. lacks the infrastructure to produce many goods domestically. Benjamin Applebaum of the New York Times noted that immediate tariff implementation, rather than a phased approach, disrupts supply chains without giving businesses time to adapt. Explainer segment: The global ripple effect. Trump's tariffs aren't just a U.S. issue, they're reshaping global trade. By targeting allies like Canada, Mexico, and the EU alongside adversaries like China and Russia, the administration has strained diplomatic relations. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the 30% EU tariffs a major blow to the world economy, while Canada's retaliatory tariffs have sparked a war of words, with Trump mocking Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as Governor Trudeau. China, the primary target, has been hit hardest. After Trump raised tariffs to 145% in April, later reduced to 20% after negotiations, China retaliated with 125% tariffs on U.S. goods and restricted exports of critical minerals used in electronics and weapons. This escalation has led to factory closures and job losses in China's industrial heartland, prompting Beijing to engage in talks in Geneva. Russia, however, faces less direct impact due to existing sanctions that have already reduced U.S.-Russia trade to $3.5 billion in 2024, a fraction of its 2021 level. Trump has threatened secondary sanctions, including 500% tariffs on countries buying Russian oil, which could affect China and India. The global market reaction has been severe. The April 9 tariff announcement triggered a 4.88% drop in the S&P 500 and a 5.97% plunge in the Nasdaq, with tech giants like Apple and Tesla losing significant market value. The uncertainty has also led to bond market volatility, with U.S. Treasury yields spiking as investors worry about the cost of refinancing U.S. debt. The optimists, voices of support. Not everyone we spoke to was skeptical or worried. At a hardware store, we met Mike, a 50-year-old contractor with a thick Philly accent and a "Made in America" sticker on his toolbox. "I'm all in on these tariffs," Mike said, leaning against a stack of lumber. "For years, we've been getting screwed by cheap Chinese tools and materials. My buddy lost his job at a steel mill because of imports. If this brings jobs back, I say go for it. I don't mind paying a bit more if it means my kids have a shot at good jobs." Mike's enthusiasm aligned with the Trump administration's narrative. White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett has argued that tariffs haven't caused widespread inflation because Americans are choosing to buy American, driven by patriotism. A White House report even claimed that prices of imported goods fell between December 2024 and May 2025, though economists like Ernest Tedeschi dispute this, citing flawed methodology. We asked Mike if he'd noticed higher prices yet. "Sure, some stuff costs more," he admitted. "But I'd rather pay extra and know it's supporting American workers. Plus, Trump's been saying this is temporary until we get better trade deals. I trust he'll work it out." Mike's optimism wasn't universal, but it reflected a segment of Trump's base. A CBS News poll found that while most Americans oppose tariffs on allies like Canada and the EU, 75% of Republicans support them, particularly on China. The skeptics, fear of recession. As the day wore on, we ventured to a community college campus to hear from younger voices. There, we met Aisha, a 21-year-old nursing student who was scrolling through her phone between classes. "I don't know much about tariffs, but I know my textbooks are already crazy expensive," Aisha said, rolling her eyes. "If this makes everything cost more, it's going to be rough. I'm already working 2 jobs to pay for school. And my mom says gas prices are creeping up because of all this trade stuff. Aisha's mention of gas prices touched on another ripple effect: tariffs on Canadian energy, 10%, and potential sanctions on countries buying Russian oil could disrupt global energy markets, driving up costs. Her broader concern about affordability was backed by data. 68% of Americans believe tariffs raise prices, and young adults are particularly opposed, according to an Economist/YouGov survey. We also spoke to Carlos, a 27-year-old Uber driver who pulled over to chat. "I'm worried we're headed for a recession," he said bluntly. "I saw what happened to the stock market last month. My cousin works at a warehouse, and they're already cutting hours because orders are down. Tariffs sound good on paper, but they're messing with people's livelihoods." Carlos's fear of a recession wasn't unfounded. Fitch Ratings warned that sustained tariffs could push the U.S. and global economies into a downturn, with one estimate suggesting a 1.4% reduction in U.S. market income by 2026. Explainer segment: Public Opinion and Political Divide. Public opinion on Trump's tariffs is deeply divided, often along partisan lines. A Wall Street Journal poll found that a majority of voters think tariffs will harm the economy, with 54% believing American consumers and companies bear the cost. However, Republicans are far more supportive, with only 20% saying tariffs do more harm than good, compared to 90% of Democrats. This divide was evident in our interviews. Trump supporters like Mike saw tariffs as a bold move to restore American manufacturing, echoing the president's rhetoric about reversing the damage of NAFTA and China's trade practices. Critics like Aisha and Carlos, meanwhile, focused on immediate financial strains and skepticism about long-term benefits. The political fallout is also significant. Trump's tariffs have alienated some of his base, particularly young adults, Hispanics, and low-income voters who helped him win in 2024. His approval ratings have dipped due to economic concerns, and even some GOP figures, like billionaire Ken Langone, have called the tariffs bullshit and overly aggressive. The bigger picture: a nation divided. As the sun set over Philadelphia, we wrapped up our interviews at a local diner, where we met Linda, a 60-year-old retiree sipping coffee at the counter. She offered a perspective that tied together the day's conversations. "I lived through the 80s and 90s when factories started closing left and right," Linda said, her voice steady but wistful. "I get why Trump's pushing tariffs. He's trying to bring back that old America where we made things. But I'm not sure it's that simple anymore. My grandkids are paying more for clothes and toys, and I worry they'll grow up in a world where everything's just too expensive." Linda's reflection captured the heart of the tariff debate, a longing for a stronger, self-sufficient America clashing with the reality of a globalized economy. Trump's policies are a gamble, potentially revitalizing manufacturing but risking inflation, job losses, and strained alliances. The UAW's Sean Fain summed it up well: tariffs resonate with workers frustrated by decades of plant closures, but their broad application could hurt more than they help. Conclusion: Voices of America. Our day on the streets of Philadelphia revealed a nation grappling with the consequences of Trump's tariffs. From Jamal's confusion to Sarah's cautious support, Priya's frustration to Mike's optimism, and Aisha and Carlos's fears, everyday Americans are feeling the weight of these policies in different ways. Some see hope in a manufacturing revival, others see a looming economic storm. The tariffs, now in their early stages, are reshaping how Americans shop, work, and think about their place in the global economy. Whether they'll deliver on Trump's promise of long-term gain or lead to short-term pain remains to be seen. For now, the voices on the street reflect a mix of hope, skepticism, and uncertainty, a microcosm of a country navigating uncharted economic waters. As we packed up our equipment, the diner's jukebox played an Old Springs teen tune about working-class dreams. It felt fitting. Trump's tariffs are a high-stakes bet on those dreams, but only time will tell if they'll pay off, or leave everyday Americans picking up the tab.